right, let's go ahead and get to it. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to assemble the Klein Bottle, whether you have the full kit or I also have here the sort of the most bare essential kit, and I'm going to walk through the process of putting them together and give you all some tips along the way. There are some things for more experienced builders that you're going to want to see. I'm going to try to time step each sort of like section below in the YouTube video, but there are going to be some parts that if you're an experienced builder, you can just like probably watch the intro of that section, be like, got it, move on. And so yeah, so here we go. So first of all, I've got the Barebone kit, the one with the fewest parts, and then the full kit, the one with all the parts. Okay, so I'm going to open them both up and just show you what's supposed to be in them, and then if you have something that's in between, then you should know what you have and what you don't have by what parts you decided to get. Okay, so let's start with the one that is just the lowest configuration. So I'll pull this up a little bit. We'll zoom back in later. It's tough because the focus isn't always perfect on this document camera. Anyway, so here we go. We've got the bare metal enclosure. Okay. We've got a circuit board here with all of the surface mount parts already installed. Okay. So you can see there are 6 bigger ICs up here. 3 of them are op amps, 3 of them are switching ICs. We've got an op amp here. We've got some microcontrollers down here. This is a charge pump, and that's a voltage regulator. Okay, so there we go. And then, okay, in this bag we've got 2 power jacks. The reason for that is will be explained later, but you only need one, but there's just another one just in case. Should have 3 white 3mm LEDs, and then some hardware for like screwing in like the back plate or the potentiometer, some nuts and washers. And then the only other parts that are included are these custom made dual gang potentiometers that are C100K on this top section. So this one right here is C100K, and on the bottom is C10K. So it allows me to do 12 dB per octave filters, passive filters, without having an additional like buffer stage in between, so it saves parts and cost. Okay, so there should be 6 of these. Okay, all right, and that's it. And then when you want to find out what parts you need to add, that's what this document is for. Okay, so the things that are in green, as you can see here, we've got the circuit board, the case, those dual gang pots, the power jack, the LEDs, and then all of these surface mount components. Those things that are in green, it says down right at the bottom here, it's included in all the kits, so you can see that. The ones that are blue are included in kits that include pots, jacks, and switches. So if you have a full kit, it includes all these colors. But if you only got pots, jacks, and switches, well, then that's what all these blue parts should be. They should be in the box. Okay. And if you didn't get a full kit, but you did get all the small components, the PCB components, then everything that's in purple should be soldered to the, should not only be included, but should be soldered in, with one exception, which we'll see later. There was a bipolar capacitor that was just out of stock everywhere, and in order to prevent delays, I just had them manufacture without it and then dropped it in the kit later. So we'll see that. Okay. Now, here's where I'm going to kind of be really quick about this, because I'm not going to make a video totally about how to assemble a circuit board. But the starting right here, where we start with the purple section, okay, on this 100 ohm 1/8 watt resistor, and you can see all the locations here of where that goes. Starting right here is where you would start assembly on the circuit board, right at that first purple one. So if you've got this empty circuit board, this is the first part I would install. And then I would install this part and so on. Okay, these are your shorter parts primarily to start, and then you get your taller parts towards the end, so it just lets you build it up and be accurate. Now, I'm not going to go through soldering and techniques and all that sort of stuff, but just whatever it takes for you to be really precise, because that is a lot of parts. Okay. The more parts, the more chances to make mistakes. So just be very accurate as you're working through this. Okay. Now, let me set this aside. I'm going to assume at this point of the video that you can pause that, do that, solder it up, like all of those purple parts, all the way through, and then we're going to get to the next stage, which is now when I'm going to open up the full kit, because the full kit has all of those parts already soldered in. And then there's something that's particular to the full kit that hopefully you don't have to do if you installed all the parts yourself. So here we go. So I'm opening up the full kit. Here's that circuit board inside. You can see all the parts in there. I'm going to need to cut this, it looks like. So there you go. There's our circuit board. All the parts installed except for one. And it's this 47U bipolar. Again, because at the time in which they ordered the parts, it was just out of stock at so many places that it was going to delay manufacturing potentially by months for that one part. And I had some, but not enough for like the full run and to ship it over there. It's just, so I just said, do it, and then I'll add in, that part myself, or for the kits, I'll just include it. So inside the box, and often I just like tucked it in the foam right here, is this part. And so since it's bipolar, it doesn't really matter, but I get in the habit of long leg, square hole, positive. Even though this is bipolar, it doesn't really have a positive or negative. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in. I'm going to fold it down, clip it, solder it, all the whole thing. All right, now, after you've installed that part and soldered it in, there is some cleanup work to do, particularly if you've got the full kit and it's all soldered in. But even if you have had soldered them all in yourself, this is a good check through to do anyway. And basically it's to check their work and to clean up some things. So one is to check to make sure that all of the soldering is good. That is pretty rare to find a bad solder joint in this process. It's very consistent. But then the other one is, and this will vary, I've just found it's varied so much from board to board, is the height at which they clip these leads. We don't want really long legs sticking out because we're going to put our potentiometers and our switches and other things here, and we need a nice flat, as flat as possible. It's not going to be perfectly flat, but fairly uniform, fairly low surface to work with. And so if you look here, you can see, like, it can be a little difficult to show on this on camera here. Maybe right there would be, let me get something that's a little, show them the camera a little better. Like right there, there's a leg that's sticking up. You can get it right there. Sticking up pretty far. In fact, this one's actually one of the best I've seen. So you might find that yours has a lot more work. But basically, here's my strategy. This is what I do. First, these ones right here, because the dual gang pots do not have like dust covers, I want to make sure that's anything, because they'll hang off this edge. I want anything along this edge cut down really as low as possible. I've taken care to try to make sure that it's really hard to do where you short something out, but just take some care and just clip those down as flush as you can, and that'll just prevent any potential shorts later. Okay, and then what I do is everywhere else I clip to just what I would consider like a reasonable low height. I'm not trying to get flush. I just anything that, and it can be tough to get this on camera, but like that's sticking up pretty good up there. That's like that one right there. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go through and I'm just going to clip off the tops. Not like really short, just clip off the little part that pokes through. So I'm not really clipping the soldered part, I'm clipping the part where that sticks out of the solder. Maybe that's a way of saying it. I'm just going for that. And I'm just going to do that all over the whole board. And the reason I just do it for everything is just for consistency, so that I know that everything is routinely the same height, that I didn't miss anything. If I try to like piecemeal it and try to just find one part at a time, I oftentimes will miss something. Then later, as I'm installing the pots and switches, I'm like, oh, why is that not going down? Why is it crooked? you know, so I just do them all. And that's the process that I use. Okay. Now, I'm not going to finish the process on this board because for the sake of time in this video, but I would go through the whole thing and do that. Okay. What I am going to do, just for the sake of making sure there's nothing way too off, is I'm going to actually do that thing I told you not to do, which is be selective. Because for the sake of this video, let's move on. Okay. Okay, I don't see anything that's too egregious. All right. All right, but I would go through and I would actually just shave off the top above where any of the legs stick out of the solder, and I would shave that down. And there we go. So this is some flush cutters is a great tool to use when you're clipping these components. Okay, now what I need to do after I've verified that all the solder is good, that I've gone through and made sure that it's fairly level and low, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding in the components that go on this side, the potentiometers and toggle switches. So if you have a full kit, you should be able to open that up. Or if you have a kit with the jack spots and switches, be able to open it up. And you'll have a bag of hardware, including the LEDs and power jacks. And you'll have inside the case just all sorts of parts. And I just realized, and I'm probably going to have to walk off screen here for a second, I just realized that this particular kit, which didn't ship because I wasn't finished with it, I don't have the dust caps on the back of these. So here's a dual gang one that looks like this. There's no dust cap that goes on there, but there should be a dust cap that goes on here. And if it's not in there, you've got a couple options. One is let me know so I can ship you the dust caps. But two, you could put a piece of electrical tape just so that when this is down there and this metal bottom doesn't short out all those contacts. Okay, if I did not include dust caps already pre-installed, and if they're just in the box, so the way to install them is fairly simple. There's two little, let's see if I can get this on camera. Yeah, here we go. So you can see that there is a notch for the front section, for the section that sticks out here. But within that notch, there's two little grooves that stick out. That's for between these between the gaps in the metal legs. There's two notches that go in there. You just line it up, push it down. Okay. And you'll need to do it for all of them. But I think for many of your kits, I had already done that for you. So, okay, this is a little out of focus, but I'll just tell you, and then you'll see it in focus later. So, in the bag, there should be a bunch of potentiometers and switches, but I want to let you know exactly what we're looking at here. So we've got this larger. It's just called a miniature toggle switch. It's on, off, on. Should have 3 legs there in a center position. Okay, and then we've got these sub-miniature toggles. This will be our phase switches. 3 legs, but this one just switches back and forth. No middle position. Okay, and then we have 5 16 millimeter A10K potentiometers. We have 3 A1 meg potentiometers. We've got 4 B10K, and then we've got those dual gang ones, those custom dual gang ones, 6 of those as before, and then we have 2 ones that look different. It's this B10K dual gang, and then this 9 millimeter smaller A10K. Okay, now with this brown one, this B10K, there's likely a tab on it. We need to snap that off. The rest of the potentiometers were ordered directly from the manufacturer, so I ordered them without the tab. But this one is stock, just from a distributor, and so it had the tab on it. Now, you're going to also need to take off the washer and nut. We'll use that later. All the other washer and nuts are in the little baggie. Okay. Out of that baggie, I grabbed the LEDs, because we're going to use them in this step. And then we've got this small A10K here. The first thing that I do in the enclosure is actually install the power jack and the foot switches. So you'll notice that there's 2 power jacks. You only need one. The other one's a backup just in case you do something to damage the first one, which is when I first started soldering with these, I definitely damaged some of them before I just learned kind of just some tricks, which I'll show you later. I don't know, tricks, just better technique. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead, when we install this in here, it's going to go in this way. And so you can see that the positive on the circuit board is on the right side. And so when I install this jack, that longer leg on that jack is going to stick out to the right. That's going to be the make wiring this up later a lot easier. Okay, I'm going to do this off camera. Trying to do it, hold it out, do it on camera. Sometimes it can be a much more difficult. I'm just screwing it in. Okay, and then next I'm going to install these foot switches. Now, when you install the foot switches, there's also kind of an ideal direction. Quite clearly, the outer 2 just point in because you're not going to be able to point them any other way and get things to fit. But the middle one should point to the left as you're looking down on it because that's kind of closer to alignment of where that hole is. On a side note, for these serrated nuts, I actually got a tool off of Stool Mac that is for some of the serrated nuts you find on guitars for their toggle switches on pickup selectors. So anyway, we did end up having to like file something out to be deep enough for like to get this to actually go down, but works really well. Okay, so there we go. Now if we check that against the circuit board here, should be that everything's going to align nicely for soldering in wires when we need to. Okay, let's move on. All right, now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take each potentiometer, we're going to start with that. Let me flip this over. And then printed on the circuit board, let me hold it up, is what goes in each one. So there's dual B10K, there's a C100K, C10K. Then we got some B10Ks for along here, along with some A1 megs, and so on. So I'm going to start with the potentiometers. That's what I'm going to do. And I like to take the legs here and I just bend them ever so slightly out. That way when I stick them in the holes here, there's just a little bit of tension against the edges, so it doesn't just like flop out on me. With so many different parts, I'm going to have to like stick it up in the enclosure. It's nice if things aren't just quickly and easily falling out of place. Okay, let me do the rest of them. Okay, so now I've got the 16 millimeter potentiometers in, just a few more parts and we're done. We're ready to stick this in case. So right here is the A10K. You should just be able to just wiggle it right into its spot, and it might be a little loose, but it'll hold in. Here's our our miniature toggle switch, 3 positions. There's a spot right here, it just drops right in. Again, it'll wiggle a little bit, that's fine. Okay, now for the subminiature toggle switches, these ones right here, I put a little piece of electrical tape, and not a very big one at all. And all I'm really covering, and I'll show you right here, is there's a little bit of a lip that sticks out of the side right here, right as the barrel meets the body here. And if I just stick this straight in, you're going to see it's so close to touching and shorting out between these 2 legs of those 2 potentiometers. And since the left leg is a ground and the right leg is a signal, you'd be shorting out the signal on this one right there. And so what I do is I take a piece of just standard electrical tape, I cut it down the middle, so cutting this in half here, and I just get a little bit. I don't need much. Okay. And this is just to make sure that that doesn't happen. I primarily focus on that little lip of just covering just right there, just so that sticks up over that lip. I don't want it like sticking way out there because this is, you know, most of this part's going to be outside the pedal, so I don't want that. And then, as you can see with some of these other ones, I'm not too concerned that every piece of metal Here, just that lip, that's the real point of concern. If that lip's not touching, the rest of it won't. And then I very particularly put this to the left, this because it can actually short out against the right one. The right one, this leg, the left leg of the one on the right of that switch, that leg right there, that's already a ground signal. So if I short it to ground, it's already grounded, so no big deal. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and do that here, where I'm facing that to the, as I'm looking here, the electrical tape is facing to the left. You can go ahead and do it to both sides, but there's actually kind of a little bit of an advantage if this ends up being grounded. Since this signal is grounded, if I touch this, and if I have some sort of like, you know, hum or whatever through some ground loop, that's actually would come through my finger. It's not. I'm gonna be touching a ground signal, so it's not gonna be like inducing that around there and somehow inducing it into the signal. Anyway, so electrical tape on the left side. All right, last piece are the LEDs. They've got a long leg for the positive and a short leg for the negative. You'll find them up here. There's a square hole that's the positive. It's also the side that says LED down here, so the square hole is the positive. So that's on this side is the positive. And I'm just going to stick them in there. At this point, I'm not going to be bending anything down. I'm not going to be soldering anything. I'm just leaving things as is. There's an alignment phase later. If you solder right now, and then we go to align things later, if things aren't perfect, which they almost never are, you're going to have problems. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stick this in the case. And the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to pull this up, make sure those LEDs all fall to the bottom. I like to make sure that all these toggle switches are facing that way, just because I find it easier to kind of rotate the thing in from top to bottom. It just lines up better. And so let's see if I can get this on camera at all. There's me. Okay. So maybe the glare is not going to help on this one. Yeah, that's better on this one. Okay. So I'm going to try to line those up, and I usually try to do so, and let me not look at the camera here. I'm going to try to do so this way. Now, the power jack is going to kind of mess with this potentiometer here. So sometimes you have to wiggle it around it a little bit, just push a little bit on it. And me looking at the camera versus looking down, I want to make sure that my alignment is good. Okay. So first thing is I make sure all the potentiometers are lined up, and then I start looking at this toggle switch, make sure that lines up, and then things start sliding in. And as I said earlier, you might have to push a little bit on this one right here to get it past that power switch. But eventually, it all pops through like it does right now. Okay? And so then I'm going to take all this hardware that I have, and I'm going to screw everything down. But I'm not going to take my hand off of pressing off the back this whole time until I'm all the way done, and then I'll flip it over. Okay, and because if you take your hand off the back, gravity's nothing soldered in, gravity can pull it out, and if it pulls it out of one of the potentiometers or toggle switches, getting it back on without taking the whole thing out, starting over, is usually what you end up having to do, so it's a pain. So good pressure, get a good grip, and get going. Okay, I want to mention this particular 9mm potentiometer right here. Its threads just don't stick up quite as far, and so because it's a smaller potentiometer. How to make a smaller one, make everything fit. You can look inside and you can see that at the end that's obvious. But what I need to do here is I end up using the nut from this brown dual gang one. Instead of sticking it back on that one, I stick it on this one because just for the sake, and let's see if I can get this in the picture at all, that on one side here it's sort of rounded and the other side it's like really flat. And it's that flat edge that allows it to grip the shorter amount of threads that are available. And so I go and I thread it that way. I usually push up a little bit on it. With my finger, I'm kind of pushing up on the legs here just a little bit to stick it out a little bit more, so it'll stick through. Otherwise, that nut may not catch at all. So there's not going to be much distance there through there. And now we've got everything in there. Now it's about alignment and solder work. Okay, so I'm going to flip this over, right? And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to push the board down, just generally make sure that it was pushed in, okay? And then I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to make sure that those LEDs are poking through the holes. I'll do a little more in line with them later, but I want to make sure they're actually in the holes, okay? And then this part you got to be careful with because you might pop the whole circuit board out. But what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to essentially take the circuit board in there and slightly tilt it this way. So it's up a little higher than it is on this end. And the reason for that is, again, what I said earlier, there's no dust caps here. So these metal-like pieces, and there's metal pieces on this potentiometer even underneath here, right along here. I want to give a little bit of extra room so that when I start to solder and I start to stick wires in those spaces, I just have a little more room to work with without shorting anything. And so what I do is I take my flush cutters and I just kind of pull up a little bit, go down the board here. Okay. I don't need to do it much, just enough to give myself that extra gap to feel safe about how, when I go to solder in those wires, that I've got some extra room to work with. All right, so now that we're at this stage, I am going to go ahead and fold down one of the legs of these lights. And I put my finger on the hole and I push on it so that, for me, I like it so that the LED just barely sticks out the top. Barely, like just the little edge of the bump. That's usually my goal. And I just fold down one leg once I get it in that spot, and I can feel that with my finger. Okay, and then there we go. Now we're ready to start final assembly. Okay, you can do the final assembly stages in a variety of different orders. I'm going to show you the method that I use. I find this to be the fastest. Okay, so I'm going to grab, in the box should be some wires like this that are pre-cut and stripped. I'm going to need to grab 8 of those. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I can count numbers. I'm a math teacher. Okay, I've got 8. I'm going to pull the white end off of each of them to reveal this. Okay, on one end, if I compare these two, you can see that one end is slightly longer than the other, right there, okay? Now, it's a wire, it doesn't really matter, but I like to put the long end in the thing where I need to create a loop, and that's usually on the jack itself, or the foot switch, or whatever I'm going to be using, on the item itself. And then the short end is what I stick in the circuit board, so that I don't have like a really long metal wire going through and eventually shorting something because it's too long. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to put in the power jack wires. I'm just going to create a little loop, or a little hook, I should say, and then I'm just going to hook it in. Like so. Do it again with the other one. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the foot switches. So at this stage, I'm doing the power jack and the foot switches. But same sort of process. I'm going to create a little hook, and I'm going to hook it in and then squeeze it tight. Now with the foot switches, when I do this, I like to push the wire down on top of the foot switch so that it stays in place while I'm soldering and isn't going to like wiggle around. It's kind of got a place to rest. Okay. The last thing you want is parts just wiggling around on you while you're soldering them. Okay, now's the time I'm going to turn on my soldering iron for the first of the final assembly soldering stages. We're going to need to do this in stages because of the wiring and when to install the wires versus the jacks, and so we'll see that. So this will be the first one, and this stage is all about soldering into the foot switches, soldering the power jack wire just into those items themselves, and then doing enough soldering on this board to do any alignment. to make sure that everything is aligned before I go and solder everything else in. So here we go. Let me show you what I do. First thing is that I'm going to solder just some of these spots along the top. Okay, not many. I'm also going to solder the power jack. Now with the power jack, I try not to put my soldering iron near the plastic because it can melt. I want to use my best technique here so that I can heat it up quickly. I'm not like putting way too much heat that transfers down and melts that plastic. So I want to make sure everything's clean, and I put a little solder on the tip, all that sort of good technique stuff. And then I'm going to go in, and if my LEDs are in place, I'm just going to solder one leg, not both. This is kind of key, because what if somehow I made some error when I flip it over? If they're both soldered in, it's hard to fix. So if I just solder one leg in, then it's easier to fix. Then I'm going to go down to the bottom section, and I'll check on this 9mm, make sure everything looks good there, because it'll probably twist on you a little bit as you're tightening it, but it shouldn't be like crazy, right? I like to solder in these posts, and then a couple things at the very bottom. And then finally, we're going to solder in those foot switches. Now, with the foot switches, these lugs are big. They require more patience, more solder. I'm pretty a perfectionist on making it look pretty. So I like to make sure that the whole hole is filled. And so that requires a lot of solder and patience. Okay, and so there we go, all soldered up. Now, once I've done that, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the tiniest amount of solder on one of each of these subminiature switches, just one, usually the middle thing, and what I'm going to first do is make sure that they're poking out of the board roughly the same height. I'm going to check the other side and make sure that they're roughly the same height. And if I get something that's close, I'm going to go ahead and just lightly, and I mean lightly, I'm not going to solder much in there just to make sure it doesn't like fall through. Okay, and so now on this side, I'm going to flip it over, and there's two things I'm checking. Number one is, do I like the height of the LEDs that I have in there? These ones look great. If I want to adjust them, now's the time to heat up that solder joint I have and adjust that height. But then two, it's the sort of where this is inside of its hole. And so I like to kind of just move. They're soldered in enough that when I move them, they kind of hold their place, but they're not soldered in so much that I can't move them. So that's why I like to solder one, but not fully, like just enough to hold it there and give me a little bit there. And so I'm going to try to center those best I can. Flip this back over, and we're going to go ahead and solder. And of course, when I solder this one, I'm not the one that I did last time, I'm going to do last. Because if I do it first, I could mess up with the alignment. So the one that's kind of holding things in place, I do last, do the other ones, and then go back to the middle. Okay, and then the last thing I do, just for good measure, is if I like the LEDs, I solder in the other leg. Okay, so now I've done the first sort of soldering stage in this final assembly. I'm going to clip out the LED wires, or sorry, the LED like little legs that come out, and then I'm going to use some needle nose pliers to place the wires of the things I soldered in, so the power jack and the foot switches. I'm going to place it in the holes that they go into. So let's clip the LED. Okay, now for the power jack, I'm going to just pull gently up and then push down on the wire to stick it in the hole that says power. And if you put the long leg on the right side here, then it should just line up straight because it's positive on this end. Now, when I do so, I'm trying to make sure that I can solder from this side. So I don't want the white to fully touch that circuit board, or else if I try to solder that, I'm going to be melting all the white sheathing. So I just want to solder to the metal. So I make sure to expose some that's in that hole, but it's not pushed all the way through, and there's a place to solder there. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing, same idea with these foot switches. Now with the foot switches, it does not matter which hole is which. I do think it's easier to kind of work with the flow of things, as you see me doing here, where I'm not crisscrossing wires. Okay, but the foot switches are simply open and they just make a connection, so which way the wires are does not matter. So same thing here, you can see that I've stuck them in the holes, but they're up a little bit from being at the bottom because I want to be able to solder from this side and not melt the white sheathing. Okay, so that's kind of the aim there. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the remaining wires, I'm going to pull off their legs, not their legs, the little white pieces that are covering the ends here. And then I'm going to take whatever side's shorter, which it looks like for this here, and I usually take two at a time, take the two shorter ends, and in every place where there's going to be a jack, which you can see just those two holes there on the end indicates that, when I stick this in, I push it all the way down, and then I actually pull up ever so slightly, and then fold down. Okay, now I've put in all of these wires up here. I have the wire from the power jack sticking in the board. I also have laid down here and on the other side, going the other way, the wires for the in and out jacks, and then I've got the wires from the foot switches here. In other words, all of the wires are now in the circuit board ready to be soldered. And so now on this stage, I've aligned everything. I've done some sort of preliminary soldering with these power jacks and the foot switches. I'm going to solder everything in all the wires, all the potentiometers, the toggle switches, this toggle switch down here, anything that remains unsoldered, I'm going to solder right now. Hey, make sure especially when you're doing this middle row, be very careful with where the soldering iron is going, because you don't want to melt any of the parts. So just be wary of that. It's really easy to make a mistake if you're not paying attention. Okay, congratulations, we're almost there. All that's left is the audio jacks, and then to test it and put it together, screw on the back plate, that kind of stuff. So to install those audio jacks, a couple of things. First, I'm going to need to grab these wires here. I'm going to pull them out of the way, and usually I just push them down so that eventually I can install those audio jacks. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and screw the audio jacks in, and we'll have one last soldering stage, and to solder those in, we're good to go. Make sure at this point you've soldered in every other wire that's not going to an audio jack, because as soon as you put the audio jacks in, a lot of those spaces you won't have access to for soldering. Okay, so here are our Switchcraft 111X audio jacks. I'm just going to unscrew the nut and washer. When I stick these in, I'm going to stick this angled side, that's the ground leg right here. The ground leg is going to be on the right. Okay. So that's the way it's going to be every time. So, and by the right, clearly, because it depends on your orientation, which way you're looking at. I mean, if you're looking at it where you're looking at it stick in as this sort of being the north direction, then we'd be looking at the east or the right side here, being the angled. Okay, so down here, these two wires, pull them up. The one that is soldered in on the right side is the ground wire, and the one that's soldered in on the left side is the signal wire. So we're going to go ahead and install all the jacks around here, and then all the jacks around there, and then I'm going to get those wires in place ready for soldering. Okay, so what I've done before my last soldering is just pulled these up and stuck the the bare wire into the hole, and I'm going to solder these in. As I solder these in, because I'm a perfectionist, I'm going to fill that hole and make it feel like it's just one cohesive unit without trying to, you know, burn that white sheathing. But you just need to do enough that you can rely on that connection for years and years and years. Okay, so here I'll show you on this one, and then I'll solder this one. So I'm going to put quite a bit of solder here, be patient with it, make sure it flows, and then you can see it's like, it's as if that hole's not there. Just a nice like tab. Okay, and that's what I do with all of them. All right, now there you have it. This is fully soldered and ready for testing and hopefully no troubleshooting. A couple of things before you go ahead and do that. Number one, I will create a walkthrough video at some point, probably not this weekend, but soon. Both for those who have a pre-built one and for those who built their own. So you can see all the functions and what it's supposed to do. So if yours doesn't do that thing, you can see that. But a couple things to note here. First of all, these are the makeup gain trim pots between the two filter stages. So the signal gets split 3 ways and goes to these, actually 4 ways because there's dry mix too. And the first thing it hits are these filters, the high pass and then the low pass. After the high pass filter, between these two, is a boost stage, just to boost up the signal, because when you cut bass, you cut a lot of volume. When you cut treble, you cut volume too, but definitely a lot with the bass. And so there's a little boost circuit to boost it up so you have still a strong signal. Now, if you plan on never using these filters, you want to leave them wide open, and you're like going to use like a synth or something like that, which is a really strong signal, you might pull down that makeup because you're going to be driving that signal pretty hot. Whereas if you're using a weaker signal or and you're like using aggressive filtering, like really cutting things down, you might want to go in and boost the signal in that, maybe just in that one channel. So, but I've found for the most part I never really needed to tweak with those with using an electric guitar or acoustic guitar. So those have not been an issue. And if you have a synth, usually there's a volume knob. You can pull it down to be in the right range. But they're there just in case. So you can use it for any instrument, any setup. Okay, then down here, there are 1, 2, 3 trim pots that are for the brightness of that LED. Now, they're being fed by the microcontroller, which is powered by 5 volts, and they're in a voltage divider configuration. Now, if you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. What that does mean, though, is that it's not just like adding resistance to slow down the current. It's actually dropping the voltage from 5 volts all the way down to 0 if you turn it all the way down. So the LED will turn completely off as you turn it down, and it will only start to turn on when you reach enough voltage to turn on the LED. For a white LED, that voltage is fairly high. In fact, its ideal operating range is usually around 3.2 volts. Which would mean actually taking this trim pot and actually turning it past noon, more than 50%, because at 50% it's only at like 2.5 volts. So oftentimes your LEDs won't even turn on until you've, or if they turn on, they're super dim if they're at kind of the location that they ship at, which is straight up. So I usually, before I test it, I usually just turn these sort of like make an X. So turn clockwise, make an X. And I found that it's usually a good spot. And if I need to adjust from there, I can do so. So I just will make a little X. Then lastly, this one is the input impedance. By default, it's sort of 12 o'clock position is 1 mega ohm, which is what like a guitar amplifier would be. If you plan on using only active instruments, you could turn that down and save a tiny amount of thermal noise. But you know, if you're going for the lowest noise possible, there you go. And then, yeah, that's the inside. And then you can go ahead and, you know, experiment. And you can watch out for that video on the walkthrough, especially if you have any issues or whatever. But this is now assembled, ready to go. It just needs the back plate and the knobs, and it's good to go.